Welcome once again to Victoria Rumble Room as we rumble around towards the summer months. And John Drisick, my sidekick, always here at the helm. And John, you're looking very, very happy and relaxed and ready for a real rumble today.
I had a little bit of a break, went to Europe for a bit of a holiday. What is stunning is the constant the constant delivery of news. There's news everywhere, every minute. We're there. The prime minister resigns. There's World Cup news all over the place and how these countries are getting along. Reading about Trump, reading about this, reading about that. Not much about Canada. So it was good to get back and get into some of the Canadian news that Mark Carney is generating.
Well, and there's a lot of news. He's generated news consistently. The question is, does that news lead to action?
Mm.
And we're going to talk to somebody who I know has some opinions about that, particularly around energy. Mark Carney wants to make Canada an energy superpower. I want that. I know you want that, John. So I think most Canadians are saying, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So what's been done? What's going to happen? We thought we'd talk to our pal Dan McTeague from the Canadians for Affordable Energy, who always has lots to say, and I'm sure has tons on this topic. Hey, what do you think about zooming him in?
Let's zoom him in and get right into it. Let's go.
And now, as promised, joining us all the way from Ontario, the central Canada, the beacon of our country, it likes to think, is is the man who is at the head of Canadians for Affordable Energy, Dan McTeague. So great to have you back on the show.
Great to be here, Robin and John. Wow, what a treat. And guess what? Summer's just around the corner. So right after this, I'm going to saunter off and enjoy a couple of weeks.
Well, isn't that smart? John just was sauntering. He's just back in time to do the show. So anyway, and there'll be lots more sauntering going on this summer, I'm sure, for all of us. Now, Mark Carney. Mark Carney has been continually talking about Canada becoming an energy superpower. He's got all these deals in place, he says, with other countries, Germany, Japan, all these places are saying, yes, we want your energy, we're ready. And it all sounds very exciting. So keeps announcing new projects. I think there were 3 projects announced just the last few days. More to come, he promises. But in fact, how is Canada doing?
Well, I think the project announcements are great if they're not re-announcements of what we've already done or variations of commitments that are already underway. I mean, it's kind of nice to take credit for something that's already happened, or at least announce it as if it's some kind of economic breakthrough. But I think all of us recognize by now it's going to take more than an obscure highway up in somewhere near Yellowknife in order to be able to kickstart the economy, which has spent 10 years, and we've discussed it here many, many times, 10 years in a state of paralysis and atrophy by saying that we're just not interested in investments. We're not interested in developments. We're a nation that can virtue signal our way into economic prosperity, while at the same time, observing the idea that somehow budgets balance themselves, or that economics is nothing that the former prime minister used to give a lot of talk to. The difficulty for Mr. Carney, aside from my personal feelings, is that he's going to have to show delivery at a time in which the economy is slipping. And I think it's not just based on the metrics that are made by statisticians or those who are in the know, the pointy heads in Ottawa or at the various capitals. It's becoming pretty apparent to most Canadians that things are not as they were, and that things have deteriorated dramatically. And in their own way of looking at things, I mean, having campaigned as many times as I did since 1978, knocking on doors, that when that sense takes over, there's really nothing you can do to prevent it. And there's only so many times you can use the argument of elbows up and blame Donald Trump for all your problems. That's a factor, but it's not one that I think is going to excite people now that they've seen Mark Carney in action. And what they hear is a lot of announcements, a lot of travel, a lot of playing hooky from question period, but very little in order to give people some confidence that the economy is on the right track. And again, one would expect that someone with his resume and with his credentials would be able to do this, but I've been skeptical from the outset, since he was claiming things that he should not have claimed were not part of his own. I don't want to get into that, but saying that he had something to do with the balancing of the budget back in 1997, 1998, or helping prevent the economic collapse of the country in the 2009 global economic crisis that we faced at the time. Those were things that had maybe a little bit to do with it, but very little to do with the policies which led us to being able to shield
And I want
ourselves.
to jump in. I want to jump in
Yeah,
because this Carney talk is starting to make me nervous. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I voted for him. Okay, I did. Yeah. Boy, come on. He's going to change the world.
yeah.
Sure seemed like it for a while. Now I'm starting to sweat a bit, Dan. I'm starting to sweat a bit. Okay, and one of the reasons I'm sweating is because I thought he'd barrel over EB. I thought we would have pipelines in BC all over. Now I don't think he can. What's the real shtick here? Can he? Can we build a pipeline to BC to sell this stuff?
Well, twisting himself into a pretzel. I mean, I read the book Values. And I've seen what he's done with G-Fans. I saw his comments going over the past decade. He's saying but not doing things that are, inextricably different than what he pledged many years ago. And so, that's the irony, is that unless this guy's willing to completely swallow himself and transform himself into, one that believes our resources have to get to markets, and that he's prepared to put aside the climate net zero nonsense that has really crippled Canada's economy, like it or not, whether it's through EV mandates, whether it's climate regulations that have strangled or stopped pipeline development, whether it's imposition of carbon taxes on manufacturers. All these things have stunted the economy. Now, this announcement he's making, are probably going to make some happy. But the elbows up group that support him now have to realize and face and are confronted with the reality that the country's ankles up. And so we are now in a situation where, Mr. Carney's nice talk and, soliloquies and silver tongue and great record and reputation, according to himself and others, has yet to bear fruit. And I think that's where the real test comes, and it's coming now.
Yeah, well, it was all feeling pretty good until a bunch of developers were bailed out. I tell you, starting to sweat, Dan, starting to sweat.
But you see countries like Germany stepping forward because they really want to do a deal with Canada on submarines. And what they're talking about is offering to help the carbon neutral plant planned for the province of Alberta, or in other words, a way to get our oil out of the ground and have a carbon capture industry there to deal with it. And that's the way this deal may come through for the Germans. They may be able to sell it because they're going to help pay for that. Do you see that as a valuable trade-off?
Well, unless we're prepared to put it in submarines and carry it halfway around the world, I'm not so sure that that's going to work. Simply because there's no major petroleum producer or oil producer around the world that is being really tied down by such an odd request that it be sequestered, that you take and place it underground and at the cost of billions of dollars. Whether someone else is going to pick up that cost or not, you then have to face decarbonization. You have to face a carbon tax. The risk of investing in Canada is pretty obvious. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at the fact that it takes 142 pennies to buy a US dollar has contributed in no small way to inflation and the decreasing of our purchase power from coast to coast in this country. But I think these kind of layering on of demands may sound great and trendy in certain corners, and great stuff that you can talk about and pretend is going to happen while swilling back Perrier needing canapes in rarefied groups around the world. But the fact is, it was Olaf Scholz, the former chancellor, who came to Canada, 5 years ago, and said, "We're here for your natural gas and your oil. We're not here for hydrogen or to be lectured on the fact that there's no business case for this." And there are still people out there who believe that is something we should be pursuing, not getting pipelines built, not getting our energy to markets, but in fact trying to find ways to qualify and say, yeah, you can do this if you're prepared to go through this, this extraordinary labyrinth, which is both costly and really constitutes, Robin, a chill for investment. It explains why Canada is in such deep trouble.
Okay, let's go expand our view a little bit here, because I'm so confused about every 2-3 hours. Strait of Hormuz is open, it's closed, it's this, it's that. Man, I cannot believe how we survive with so much energy going through that little space. What is actually happening? What is actual, and how does it actually impact Canada? It would seem to me that we should be benefiting from all this chaos. Are we?
We're not, and we should, and we would, were it not for the past 10 years of saying no and embracing net zero, which is apparently giving us what we deserve in our pockets, which is net zero. Look, the Straits, the closure, the attack on Iran, the on and off again. One day is peace, next day there isn't peace, next day there is. The ideas of MOUs, which, as we know, are mostly DOA and nice little ideas and concepts that don't necessarily last. The big problem here has been the full effect of what we saw was a 10 to 20% decrease in inventories and supplies of oil around the world. In normal circumstances, economics 101 fundamentals kicks in. Low supply doesn't curb demand, so demand remains very high. And that makes a bad situation that much worse. We've also overlaid that with emergency supplies, strategic petroleum reserves. China, United States, a number of OECD countries have been asked to do so through the International Energy Agency. But we are depleted. We are in a situation where the world's probably short 1.7 billion barrels. And for people who are celebrating and saying, yeah, we should drop oil to, 65 or 67 bucks a barrel where we left off before the war, that's all fine and dandy based on the idea that vessels are able to get out. I'm not watching that, John. I'm watching how many vessels are actually coming back in, and they're very few. And it's not just that they're reluctant to come in, or may not be able to come in, or uncertain about coming in, can't get insurance to come in. It's the time it takes to get those vessels in, the time it's going to take for fields that have been closed for a few months to crank up again. It's going to, and of course to load new cargoes. A lot of supply production has been affected either physically through bombs or through disruptions such as having to shut down prematurely. All this means is that the ability for us to get back that 1.7 billion barrels, in other words, 17 full days of all what the world would consume on, is what we're missing. In order for that to happen, you're going to have some kind of a price signal. But having prices drop to 69 bucks a barrel, it's not the way to do it. And I think there is a strategy that no one's really paying a lot of attention to. I won't get into too much detail. The short selling and the idea that we can talk this down, that we can force the jawbone down the price of oil at a time in which it's critically short, in which there's severe shortages, is a very dangerous outcome. Why? Because it's short-term gain and long-term pain. What if we go back not to 240 a liter here in Vancouver, but we actually wind up continuing to pay $1.95 to 2.15 for a full year and a half, well above the average we've seen over the past couple of years? What if the same thing happens to the rest of Canada? My point is that in order for us to come to the world's rescue, we need to have time to be able to have those prices reflect high demand and low supply. The fact that they haven't is interesting, but it has an enormous, deep-seated inflationary consequence for the world economy, and Canada will not escape that because, of course, as I mentioned at the outset, it takes 142 pennies to buy a US dollar. That's an extra 38, 39 cents a liter. The world doesn't believe that Canada can come to its rescue with respects to the resources that it has, which tends to be some of the greatest in the world.
Let's talk about free trade for a second. CUSMA free trade talks are underway, and President Trump has been very clear for quite some time. I don't know how much of it's bluster or how much of it he actually thinks. That's a hard read, but he keeps saying he doesn't need anything from Canada. He doesn't need our aluminum, he doesn't need our steel, doesn't need our gas, doesn't need our oil. How much leverage do we get, do you think, in these talks? Because in fact, we do export a lot of oil at a discount to the United States now. How could that whole scenario change? How would these negotiations proceed in the oil sector?
Well, Donald Trump's art, whoever wrote it for him, is to talk something down and trash the other side so that you come back and get some kind of a deal out of them and make them feel a little bit better by backing off a little bit. We know that. But perhaps the most instructional factor that I saw take place a year and a half ago, and that's Danielle Smith went down to Washington while everybody else was panicking, and Trump was going to put all these tariffs on it. And someone had a bit of a pull aside. We like that little word when I work in foreign affairs, a pull aside. And in that pull aside, someone came to Donald and said, "Hey, the Don, your country consumes 21 million barrels a day. It produces 13.5 million barrels a day. You have a deficit of some 6, 7 million barrels a day. More than half of that is satisfied by Canadian oil. So if you think you're going to tax it, you're actually just going to, it's a boomerang. It's going to come back and just hit you in the side of the head. And we know you hate high prices of gas. You spent your first term tweeting about how gas prices are too high. Apparently, what they did in Iran has a lot to do with, making sure he can make statements that always try to depress the price of oil, as I mentioned earlier. But here's another factor. The United States light, tight shale oil is not the proper oil you need to make things like kerosene, like diesel. Diesel is the global workhorse, and no Canadian oil, because you can't get it from Venezuela necessarily, not yet, anyways. Mexican oil has been contaminated. There's some problems there I won't get into. But without Canadian oil, the United States is snafu'd, and they know it because your military doesn't run without diesel, your jets don't run without diesel, your agricultural sector doesn't run with diesel, your transport system, planes, trains, and some automobiles don't run without diesel. In other words, what Canada has, and which Canadians tend to overlook, and some, in fact, alarmists and activists try to trivialize, the very heavy oil produces something that the world desperately needs as long as you have the upgraders to do it. And guess what? The United States spent a lot of time building massive upgraders, especially in the US Gulf Coast, to process heavy slates of crude. Low API is what we refer to it as. So Canada has an advantage it doesn't really use, doesn't play very well. But I think Danielle Smith made that very clear a year and a half ago, which is why oil became less of a concern. And, we have an energy matrix with the United States, a connection between the two. The gas from the Montney, the gas from Alberta, the gas that we have in the United States and the shale production that they have just south of me here, it tends to be going back and forth. We import from them, but we also export to them, depending where you are in the country. So our relationship on energy is symbiotic. The United States, despite Donald Trump, can't live without Canada, and Canada, to a large extent, can't exist without the United States. So that's kind of a strong point I think we can play in this CUSMA deal, in this USMCA deal. And I think what we're going to get is something of a compromise. We're going to have to give up something, but so are they. And the rhetoric and bluster of Donald Trump, I think, is going to go out the window very quickly. Although some Canadians are going to have to get ready to make some concessions. I don't know if that means supply management, but that's an area I think a lot of Canadians, if they really looked at it, may want to have some kind of modifications, notwithstanding the massive interests that are behind it.
Let's talk about your favorite subject, okay, as you've indicated many, many times before, and that's anything. So e-bikes, e-cars, electronic transportation of any kind. Is all of this recent energy activity, supporting the growth of that industry in Canada, and therefore, I suspect, supporting the growth of trade with China?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. We've gone down the road, especially with batteries and electric vehicles, and I'm not talking the smaller vehicles, which we tend to import from that region. We found that to be costly, and it has certainly been perhaps an undertaking that was a little premature. We premised all this on the United States, the Biden administration's IRA, in which they were prepared to put trillions of dollars towards electric vehicle manufacturing. And one by one, manufacturers, including companies I used to work for before I was a politician, like Toyota and others, have simply said, yeah, we're not going to go crazy on this stuff. And in some cases, like Honda, like Ford, GM, we're walking away from it. We will build if you're going to grift us, if you're going to give us some money and subsidize its building, subsidize the grid, subsidize the consumer. Of course, we'll take advantage of that, but we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. And the danger, you mentioned I'm from Ontario, the danger is that the automotive sector is in trouble. There's no doubt its future is very much in doubt. I think that began with the foolish idea that we should force people to drive electric vehicles. If they want to drive them, that's great. Have fun. Have at it, by the way. And don't get me to subsidize you. If they think they're great, then you have them. But the idea that we have now is that we now want to do indirectly that which we can't do directly. And by that, I mean that the federal government is saying, yeah, we got rid of the EV mandates, but we're going to now impose 75% tailpipe emission controls on all vehicles sold in Canada by 2030 by 2035. It means that someone driving a Freightliner, a Kenworth, an International is going to have to drive it on one cylinder. That's not possible. The technology doesn't exist. The United States and California tried 50% reduction. It didn't work because the law of physics and technology is not there. So I think what Mark Carney is trying to do is to get back his EV mandates and to make it cheaper, which has always been the issue. You're going to get the Chinese to bring their subsidized, perhaps low environmental, low labor standard vehicles to come in and flood the country. And that's great, but that is really the kiss of death to the Canadian automotive sector. Some will say what's left of it. I happen to work for a company that was the number one producer and exporter of vehicles. It's Toyota. Back in my early time, it used to be GM, Ford, and Chrysler. And Honda now indicating the same thing, that maybe our future in this country is going to be precluded as far as building. Oh, we'll sell it, we'll buy it. But I think Canadians have to make a real strong decision about, the folly of net zero. To use Justin Trudeau's comments in 2015, because it's not 2015 anymore. And I think we have to wake up, smell the coffee, and get real about this. Internal combustion engines aren't going anywhere. Electric vehicles, yeah, they're going somewhere, as long as you got a country like China that's willing to dump them with major political consequences, bribes. And I would say that, in the case of using our farmers as a bargaining chip or a bribe, or cajoling us into doing this, I think was a very bad decision. It won't be 49,000 units with a 3% increase every year. That comes up for renewal in January. Robin and John, I think the Chinese are going to come back and say, hey, if you want any more tariffs, which we can easily put back on, it better be 149. It better be 249. If that's the case, then I'm in Ontario. We don't get the nice, decent winters. We do get -20, -30. Good luck driving your appliance around in -30-degree weather.
Well, you don't see a lot of big trucks. I was just in not central Canada. I was on the prairies. I have family in Calgary and out in Saskatoon. I was out driving around in those places, and all you see are big trucks. Once you get out of Calgary, all you see are people driving not just trucks, but big trucks everywhere. And these aren't trucks that are electric. They're fully operative. The farmers aren't ready to change horses yet. But I want to ask you about David Eby, our premier, who has been in opposition to a lot of things that Carney at least has been talking about in terms of becoming an energy superpower, at least in the way that Carney wants it, not the way Eby wants it. And I get down to the pipeline, the fact that an MOU was signed between Alberta and the federal government about putting through a new oil pipeline in the north to Kitimat or to Prince Rupert. And Eby's totally against that idea for a whole vast number of reasons, including he says he has all these other projects that are more important. They don't want to stop the tanker ban. There's all these things going on. And this strong opposition continues from a premier who is at the lowest ratings of any premier, I believe, in the country right now. And his party has a razor-thin lead. So, does Carney just sit back and wait him out? Or does Carney push ahead and build his pipeline anyway? I believe constitutionally, the federal government can actually put that pipeline in action without the say-so of the provincial government in British Columbia.
I think it can. It probably will. We saw with the TMX, which you guys know I did a lot of work on. God rest his soul. John Horgan and I didn't agree on that for good reason. I didn't think it was fair for a company to be booted out because of our indifference on Indigenous affairs or not doing our job on that front. And then, of course, all of this, this fussing over the weather, climate. And as a result, you saw Kinder Morgan move out, sue the federal government, which they had a slam dunk case. And you and I and the country had to pay 30 to 50 billion bucks to build a pipeline. The private sector is prepared to build for zero. Look, people come to this country because they know our resources, our advantages, our resources, and they also know that we're damn responsible when it comes to these things. But there's only so far you can take your ideology and saying no, no, no. And I'm sorry, I want to hear from all the groups, including Indigenous groups, real Indigenous groups, not ones that I believe are just constructs of foundations and charities like the Coastal First Nations, which represents no land, has no treaty, is a fabrication of some of the climate groups out there. Regardless of my opinion, my personal view is that the interests of the many come well before the selfish views of a few who are extraordinarily narrow-minded. We need pipelines into our to our best trading partners. We need to get our resources to global markets. We can't have, aside from oil, we can't have companies like Nutrien saying, "Hey, listen, we're not going to go take our and build a port in Vancouver or anywhere to get our product off the coast of BC. We're going to take it instead to the Pacific Northwest, to Washington State, at a cost of loss of billions of dollars to the Canadian economy." We cannot regulate and pretend that we're going to use net zero and other narratives in order to justify what is, in fact, the shutting down of the Canadian economy. I think Canadians are now starting to understand the real net effect of what net zero has done. It has really hobbled the country. And if you have political characters on the left, I only remind my friends where the NDP is federally. They've been virtually wiped out. Now, they may come back. The Liberals know that, and the only way the Liberals can ensure that they don't come back is by getting policies that will continue to ensure that even those who are hardcore Labor NDP supporters know that jobs will happen with the kind of development in the resource sector that EB and others find themselves at odds with for whatever reason.
In fairness, EB has jumped on board with LNG, and Wab Kinew, another NDP premier, is fully on side and wants to see an LNG plant up in Churchill on Hudson's Bay. You see Eastern Canada, you see places like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick saying, "Hey, where's our LNG service?" Everybody wants to jump on LNG. Is that perhaps part of the solution? If we can't get fully on board with oil and gas quick enough, at least we're moving with our natural gas in a meaningful way, and there seems to be a big market for it.
Well, I think someone's clued into the idea that the Montney is some of the richest gas deposits anywhere in the world, and that the same group of people who just 5 years ago opposed any LNG, and we're a little late to the game. And I'm not saying that it's good to convert. It's just that you've done a lot of damage in the process. Now, move aside, Clyde. Glad you didn't. You've come to see the light of day. But the reality, I think, for many is that if they're going to accept one but not the other, it seems a little strange. Same kind of similar arguments that I hear from people saying, "Oh, natural gas is bad. We have to turn off our natural gas. We shouldn't have natural gas to heat our stoves or heat our homes in Vancouver and places like that." Thank goodness the mayor and the council have rejected that as well. It's taken a long time for people to finally recognize that we've done some pretty dumb things and that they were predicated on some rather false and dishonest narratives that I think have done undue ideological damage to the country. And so I'm, I'm willing to say, listen, everyone can have a reason to change their mind, but at a significant cost to the Canadian economy. I'm not over the fact that Kinder Morgan, Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, cost the Canadian economy money that could otherwise go to hospitals and to programs and to helping the next generation. That so many Indigenous groups in this country were denied, even though there was virtual a majority of Indigenous groups that were on board with the proposal of these pipelines. Look what we saw with the last, natural gas pipeline to your coast that was built just by Fortis just a year and a half, 2 years ago. The rioting, the amount of civil disobedience, the vandalism that went on, it was all justified at the time, and the
all from groups from the Lower Mainland, all from environmental groups, not the First Nations on the ground.
And that's the base of the NDP vote to a large extent. Those are the same people who, and I remember full well the relationship between Oregon and the Greens when they first made their attempt and won government. I know I'm going back 5 or 6 or 7 years. They haven't stopped. The NDP believes that its way to win, to consolidate and to win in the province is to continue satisfying the Green. Unfortunately, it's been very clear. It's now demonstrated that the Green agenda has hobbled not only Canada's economy, it's certainly hurt BC's economy. I don't talk about its credit rating having been degraded. By the way, I don't know if EB is the most unpopular premier in the country. I know that our Doug Ford is not.
Doug Ford's right up there. Yeah, that's true.
So we're reaching the end of the natural patience level of the internet viewer. That's about 30, 35 minutes. So I'd like to have a last question. And with you, we always do the same thing. Let's look ahead and perhaps reflect on where gas prices might be. What are some of the political themes or movements that you see that could really impact prices or policies over the next little while into the fall?
John, I think the gas price is going to drop probably another 10 cents a liter before it starts to bounce back up. Not because the federal government's going to reimpose the 10-cent excise tax plus GST. I sense that there is a major deficit around the world. And although in the case of the US and Iran, you've satisfied the war premium, which just drove prices up, you haven't addressed the deficit premium. And that you have such a lag between what the futures market is saying and what the spot market, the real world market is saying. You're not buying oil anywhere in the world for $69 a barrel. You're buying for 110, 120. That price has to be reflected at some point. And don't take my word for it. Um, Jet fuel, which is in critically short supply around the world, many regions, saw an increase of 3% in demand this year from this time last year. And that is, evidence of the fact that there hasn't been the price signal on the demand side to curb demand at this point. And I'm not saying we should all shut down and do whatever we have to do. We're dealing with a physical crisis, and there's no amount of jiggery pokery or any type of games that can be played by markets to try to suppress the reality of, as I mentioned earlier, economic fundamentals 101. So where are we going? I think prices here are going to go up. Go down another 10 cents a liter from 190 maybe down to 180. But they're then going to go back, make their way back towards $2 a liter for the balance of the year, at least for 2026. And two factors that have to also be considered: the value of the Canadian dollar. It frankly stinks. As I mentioned, 142.34, I think was what it closed out yesterday. I haven't looked at it today. Is a disgrace. We've never seen the petro-loonie lose its value in the way it has in this past crisis, where the Canadian dollar would have clearly helped Canadians. What does it mean here in Vancouver? A savings of 40 cents a liter if the Canadian dollar was still matched to the fact that we are a country that produces energy and could help the world. We weren't able to do that, and there's a real significant cost. It isn't just borne by energy. Think food costs, because that's part and parcel why we're paying so much for everything. Everyone feels their purchase power has been completely eroded.
Wow, so many happy things to talk about. And at least on a happy note, we can wish you a very happy holiday this summer, Dan.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you again for joining us on the program. We'll have you back again. And we love having Dan McTeague because it really gives us such an opportunity to rumble on.
Rumble on, John. Rumble on there, Rob.